Welcome to Suddenly Different, where we explore stories and strategies for life when it doesn't go to plan. I'm Leigh-Anne Charland, inviting you to join me on this journey. What happens when the future you plan vanishes overnight? In today's episode of Suddenly Different, I'm joined by a woman whose very existence defies prognosis. Petrea King, founder of the Quest for Life Foundation, best-selling author and pioneer of integrative healing in Australia. In her 30s, Petrea was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia and given just weeks to live. But instead of surrendering to the sentence, she began a journey of profound inner inquiry, a journey that took her beyond the edges of medicine, beyond fear, and ultimately into purpose. Since then, Petrea has guided thousands through grief, trauma, illness, and change, reminding us that no matter what we've lost, there is always life on the other side of the unthinkable. If you've ever asked, how do I find peace when everything changes, or what now? This conversation may hold the quiet answer for your heart that it has been longing for. Welcome, Petrea. It's a true honour to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Leigh-Anne. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, let us kick it off with, do you remember the moment when everything suddenly shifted from you? The moment your life became suddenly different?
Look, there have been several of those, I must say, but certainly the one where I was diagnosed with leukemia and told that I wouldn't see Christmas, which was just 12 weeks away, that one definitely stopped me in my tracks. And contrary to what some of our listeners might think, I was relieved for a moment, because up until then, there'd been a lot of traumas in my life and I'd never dealt with any of them. I just kind of stuffed them all down inside of myself. I lived with chronic pain because I'd had 3 years in hospital as a teenager having surgery to my legs, and I had a lot of orthopedic surgeries. And my brother had just taken his life. So he'd told me as a very young child that he knew he had to do that by the time he was 30. So when I was diagnosed, I was in a very low state myself and very full of guilt and shame, because as a little girl, I had taken on that responsibility to make sure that that would never happen for my brother. And I failed. I failed myself. I failed him. I failed the family. So the diagnosis, while it changed everything, for a moment there was that sense of, oh, this is too hard. I don't know how to do a good life. Maybe I can do a good death, but I don't know how to do a good life. That didn't last terribly long because I had 2 little children who were 4 and 7 years old. And I was suddenly struck with the feeling, but I know I haven't lived yet. I haven't done what I came here to do. Be blowed if I know what it is, but I haven't done it.
You haven't done it. And how many of us have had that feeling? I know I too have had that. There's got to be more. Is this really what I'm meant to be doing? You know, being on that rat race of constant contribution and constant survival.
And that striving, all the time striving. And I don't know about you, Leigh-Anne, for me, a lot of that goes right back to early childhood, you know, where I was trying to get it right for everybody, to kind of survive the childhood and try and figure out how you're meant to be human and what's required. And so I think a lot of us struggle with finding our sense of self as we grow up because of our upbringing. And in a way, that's the journey of being human, is because little babies, they're wide awake. They're in the present moment. And then we begin to realize that love is not unconditional and that I have to be a particular way in order to get my needs met, or maybe even just to keep myself safe as a little kid. And so we begin to adopt all of these weird and wonderful beliefs and behaviours to keep ourselves safe or to fit in or to be approved of or whatever it might be. And then, of course, at some stage, we have to let all that stuff go again and return to the present moment. And that's quite a journey for most people.
Oh, it is. And listening to you say that at a young age, junior school, you made a decision that it was your responsibility to make sure that your brother didn't commit suicide. Like,
yeah,
that is actually what our little kids do.
Exactly. And they don't go and tell mum about
that's right.
it either.
They just make a decision, and it is one of those decisions that stays in their beings, and they are doing it for the right reason, but it's not their job.
Exactly. And, as that little girl, because I was particularly small for my age, at 9, I think I still had all of my milk teeth in and they all had to be manually removed. I think I was so reluctant to grow up. But when my brother told me that he knew he had to take his own life by the time he was 30, as a very little girl, I remember thinking, I have to grow up really quickly to look after Brendan. And I did. I grew 23 centimetres in the next 15 months, and that deranged the bone growth in my legs and caused my knees to dislocate, and I couldn't stand up. I couldn't walk. So I left school at 13 and went into an adult hospital, a private adult hospital at Killara, Dalcross Hospital, and virtually had 3 years there, having my femurs cut and my lower legs turned out, my tibias cut and my lower legs turned in, and that went on and on and on for years, and I had to learn to walk again. But it was fabulous because I was away from Brendan, whom I adored but found very scary. I was out of school and I found school terribly difficult to cope with. Not the subject matter, but the people and the things they talked about. And I was always preoccupied with, why are we here? How do you know how to be a human being, and how do you know that you've lived the life you came here to live? And yet they were all full of talking about boys and, I don't know, just things that I wasn't that interested in at the time. And so being in hospital where I could read, and I read Thomas Merton and Krishnamurti and Alan Watts and the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and all of these books that talked about the purpose of human existence, as well as encyclopedias and dictionaries. And it's really where I educated myself over that 3 years in hospital.
Wow. And did you have, in that hospital, I'm curious, did you have any significant people that you met that also sparked inquiry or gave you a role model, that caring?
Yeah, look, it was interesting because it was an adult hospital, so it wasn't geared up at all for children. There were so many experiences that were instructive, really, for me. I did have quite a few out-of-body experiences, which, because of pain, which I found quite fascinating. And it was a bit of a secret because I wasn't meant to be out of bed, and yet I could get out of my body. But I felt a bit guilty about doing that as well. So I think also the other thing that happened was, because I was in traction at one stage for 9 months, I was a sitting duck. So everyone came and told me their stories. And even when I was, 13, 14, 15, people would come, and one fellow told me that he was gay. Apparently that was a very problematic thing for him. People talked to me about their marriage, their relationships, their worries about their children, some of their private things. So I kind of started my training very early on in life, listening to people's stories, which I've always found fascinating.
And they are. They truly are, and especially when we can learn from them and experience that true connectedness, where we're providing a safe space for them to share. Because back in those days, to share that you were gay would have been so risky.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose disclosing it to a little girl in hospital was as good as anywhere because it wasn't going to go any further.
Yeah.
and I think we're all seeking that, to be seen, that somebody actually sees us and gets us. And by get us, I mean they get why we're behaving the way we are. They get why we feel the way we do, and they can meet us in that place. And that's often a rarity, to find that safe space. And, later on when I had leukemia, I was given that safe space. And that is indeed what's always been in my heart, to want to pay that forward in some way if possible. And so that's really the work we do at the Quest for Life Centre, is to create that safe, nurturing space in which people feel like we get what it's like to suffer. Not because we know what it's like for you. We can't know what it's like for another person. And it's never helpful to say, I know exactly how you feel. You don't know how that person feels. But if you're familiar with your own place of anguish, your own place of despair, of hopelessness, of powerlessness, of great anguish, of grief, then it makes you a much better companion to be with other people who are venturing into that place within themselves, perhaps for the first time for them. So I think humanity is aching for these conversations now. The conversations about how do we live together? How do we love and care for one another in community, rather than going down this very logical, rational, technologically based society? I think there's a lot of hesitation and a lot of apprehension about going down that pathway. I know there's excitement too, and the possibilities of AI, I don't think we've even begun to really understand, and how it's going to change everything on the planet over the next couple of years. But I do think it's awakening in humanity a question about what kind of existence do we want to have, and what kind of society do we want to have.
I understand, and with as humans, we need connection of some kind, even if it's only with ourselves. We need connection, and we need to feel like we matter. Again,
Well, we
again, often we don't matter to ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's
And so often that comes from the stories that we tell ourselves from our childhood, where we may have made up beliefs that my value lies in what I do, not who I be. But you see, if we have a belief like that, then we have a particular part of the brain called the RAS, the reticulating activating system. And that means it's always out there looking to see what I can do to validate my existence. Because if my value lies in my doing, not in my being, then I have to be busy doing. Or if we've grown through our childhood and feel like no matter what I do, it won't be enough, then we're always looking to see where we didn't quite measure up. We didn't quite make it. And it keeps us in this perpetual relationship with lack, or with fear, or with anxiety. But it also gives us the opportunity to let go those beliefs when we understand that they're what we've acquired. They're not the truth of who we are in our essence.
absolutely, absolutely. You've spoken of illness as a soul journey rather than a medical event. Can you unpack what that means for you?
Mm. I was at a conference just last weekend on integrative care for oncology patients, people with cancer. And it was so fascinating because it was all about the body, measuring this and measuring that, and then correcting the levels of this and correcting the levels of that. But if we don't engage with the person and their story is creating neurotransmitters that are going into the epigenetic environment. So if the story doesn't change, And I quoted several stories where people had held on to very strong beliefs for a very long period of time. And of course, we know that most people with cancer have had 3 or 4, depending on the research, adverse childhood events. So abuse, trauma, something that happened in their childhood that may have yet been unresolved. And if we don't resolve those traumas, then we keep dumping into the epigenetic environment, which is the environment around the cell, the same neurotransmitters of stress, of reaction over and over again. So we can measure all the levels of vitamins and minerals and the metabolic pathways and what's happening in a person's body. But if we're not engaging with the being and we're only treating the body, we leave out a huge part of the healing process. And what we see when you do engage with the story and a person resolves the story and processes the emotions of that story is oftentimes it changes completely what's in the epigenetic environment, and that person ends up having a much longer remission than was expected, or less symptoms than were expected. And that makes a profound difference to the person's quality of life, which often translates into their quantity of life as well.
Yes, yes. And I have found that in more the functional medicine arena, they do look at more of the whole package, the whole being,
Yes,
rather than just the blood tests and the MRIs. And I the group I went to the similar conference a couple of years ago when long COVID and COVID vaccine injury was being discussed, and it was an amazing, safe place to talk about what was going on,
yes,
because there
yes,
was very little known in the in the in the medical profession. It was definitely being painted a certain way in the media, and so
yes,
it was very comforting to know that there was a group of people who were willing to consider the whole, and the
yes,
importance
yes,
of conversation and group work, and
mm, mm,
which is all good. And I know that I'm fortunate as I've done a lot of this kind of work over my life, um, and looked at my trauma. My dad was a Vietnam vet. He was a tunnel rat, so he came home with PTSD, and so we live with that in our household. And I didn't know who I needed to be okay. So I would be
yes,
whatever to be safe. And I carried that on to
yeah,
adulthood,
mm,
because I don't know whether it's a Western thing that we don't really have a rite of passage into adulthood where we put our childhood ideas aside and we become grown-ups.
yes. Well, I know for the Maasai, a 12-year-old lad is sent out with a knife to kill a lion, and that's his rite of passage. Our rites of passage are a bit pathetic, really, in the Western world. It's about getting your pee plates, having your first sexual encounter, getting drunk. These are not really wonderful rites of passage to aspire to. And I think we need to do a tremendous amount of work in both respecting our young people and our elders. Like you, different generation. My father had just come back from the Second World War, and he too had PTSD, and they were told, of course, you're not allowed to talk about it. And it wasn't really until I was writing my memoir a few years back that I realized that he obviously had PTSD. He would line my 2 brothers and myself up lying on the floor when I was 4 and put matches between our toes, and I was terribly ticklish, so it'd make us giggle like mad. But then he'd light them and see who could put up with it the longest. And it wasn't until I was writing it, I thought, that's a bit odd, really, isn't it? A bit of an odd thing to do for a 4-year-old girl. And so I think, like you and your dad, these poor men came back terribly traumatized. But remember, too, that I think all of us have been traumatized over the last 5 years. When you read all of the characteristics of a coercive control relationship, that's what we had with our government. And that through the media, through the relentless repetition of words and phrases and the denigration of so many people and the hateful attitude that was literally cultivated in public to hate the other. And this is something that has only recently happened in our society, that you have to kind of hate the person who has a different opinion from you, whether it's about gay marriage, whether it's about the voice, whether it's about vaccines and mandates. And all of these things are so polarizing now. And it's broken apart relationships and families. It's broken people's social structures around them. In some workplaces, it was really quite dramatic as well. So, and in many workplaces, they lost huge numbers of nurses, of teachers, and it was a very, very stressful time that we all went through without acknowledging that we were going through it. And everybody just did their darndest to survive that time. But it had huge consequence. And of course, we never deal with the trauma when we're going through the experience. We never process the emotions when we're going through the experience. We park them for later, when we're in a much better emotional, psychological state to be able to bring those feelings to consciousness, process them. And we're really only getting into that period sort of now, but because there are so many other stressors that are, what's happening in the world, what's happening with our family's health, perhaps, all kinds of things that are happening. It's just this layer upon layer upon layer of stress and no reprieve for people to begin to process some of the feelings that they're having. So I'm finding an awful lot of people who are deeply, it's not just exhaustion, it's a deep fatigue, almost like a spiritual fatigue that people, that a good night's sleep doesn't fix.
Yes.
And I think what's happening for many, many people now, I feel that in many ways I've been working with people on the precipice in their own life for the last 40 years, but we're now globally on the precipice, because human beings tend not to change until we're at the precipice, until we get to a place where the suffering is so great that we get to that wonderful place where we say, that's it. Something has to change, and it's me. I can't change what happened. I can't change my parents, my childhood. I can't change the traumas, the tragedies, the unexpected, unthinkable, unimaginable things that have happened. What I can change, and this is the only power that we have, and it's a mighty, mighty power, is the power to choose our attitude to what happened and how we're now going to respond to what happened, rather than continue to react as if we're a victim of what happened. So once we get to that place where we can accept what happened, this did happen, and it happened to all of us. Many of us went through the bushfires. We didn't have any time to process the emotions from that before we were in lockdown. And so this cumulative stress, I think, is getting us to a place where collectively we're going to say, wake up. This is not the kind of world we want to live in. And I believe we're at that point now, and that many of our systems are failing, and we recognize they're no longer sustainable, and we're not quite sure what is going to emerge, but we know what we don't want. And I've seen that period many, many times in an individual's life. We know what we don't want. We haven't yet figured out quite what we do want, but we definitely know what we don't want. We don't want to keep saying yes. when our whole being shrieks no.
Well,
And so I think we're at a very interesting and wonderful time for humanity.
well, it's so interesting that, like, they're saying that bowel cancer in people in their 30s is becoming far more prevalent. And, you know, for me, that is, like, just holding it all in. It's just not being able to let go of anything, just being so tight. And,
Yeah, yeah.
and
And our food has changed.
well,
You
that's
know,
right.
I'm nearly 74, but food has changed dramatically in my lifetime. You know, we used to either eat out of the back garden or you'd run down to the greengrocer to buy some vegetables for dinner. You didn't do a weekly shop. There were no supermarkets. There were greengrocers, and they bought from directly either from the farm or from the bigger market. But food was probably severed from the ground, its relationship with the earth, and eaten within a week. Now, food can be severed from the ground and not eaten for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years. It can stay in refrigeration for that long. Then it's gassed, irradiated. It's gradually eked onto the market according to economic concerns. None of that's got anything to do with people's health. The soils are dead. And if it's not in the soil, it's not in the food. And human health starts in the soil, where there are meant to be worms and microbes and minerals and a living ecosystem that's feeding in through those roots into the fruits and the vegetables that we eat. But now it's all just stimulated by fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, fertilizers, and the poor soil is dead and the nutrition doesn't even make it into the food. And now we're so seduced by the way a thing looks rather than any inquiry about how it came into being. And we need to understand where our food comes from. We've been severed from the cycles of nature. You know, we used to have celebrations around equinoxes and solstices for harvest and for sowing and for planting, and our lives were woven into nature and her rhythms and seasons. And that relationship is becoming more and more severed in so many arenas, and people are feeling lost without that connection. September used to be the 7th month, October was the 8th, November 9th, December. There are 28 days in the moon cycle. There were 28 days in a month. There are 28 days in a woman's cycle. But again, we've moved to 12 months. So again, it throws all of these rhythms that we had with nature into disarray. And we're feeling the consequences of this severing of connection with one another, with ourselves, with the planet, with our food, with nature and her cycles and seasons. So no wonder we're feeling bereft and lost and disconnected.
Yes, yes.
While we have the illusion of connection through all of these devices.
Which is, to me, it's anti-connection. So I know that I am not in a great physical, emotional and good health space when I'm scrolling. I'm not even reading. I'm not even, I'm just scrolling. I'm not looking for likes. I'm not doing anything. I'm doing nothing but with a device, it's just not healthy. And I think that it is a good thing that they're looking at adjusting the laws around children becoming immersed in it, because it's such a habit, right? And you're on it all the time.
It's an addiction.
Well, it is an addiction, and for me, I think, speaking about addiction, I think that I was addicted to my trauma story, right? And so therefore my RAS would look for ways of re-triggering my trauma, because then I got to tell my story again.
Yeah.
And once I actually really let go of the need to do that, story's still there. It exists, it happened, but the need to use it as my excuse, as my shield, as my identity. Once I was able to move from that to understanding my choices, that my beliefs, I could change them, my values, let's have a look at what they are. Interesting times.
Absolutely. I think, we often talk at Quest that there comes a time in your life where you bump into one of the Ds in life. And a D might be a drama, disappointment, a disaster, a diagnosis, a death, a divorce, a despair, a disloyalty, a disagreement, disability, drought, a doubt. There's loads of them. And everything that's second nature to you doesn't work. So it might be second nature to you to not sleep or sleep all the time, not eat all the time. It might be second nature to blame yourself for your own unhappiness, to blame other people for your own unhappiness. It might be second nature to you to drown your sorrows or drug yourself or withdraw or go into an old pattern of I do it myself. But this D demands more from us than we've ever had to draw on up until now. And we get to that fabulous place where we say, that's it. Something has to change. And it's me. I can't change what happened. We might have to weep the tears, rail about it, scream about it, write about it, dance it, sing it, talk it, paint it. But once we've processed the emotions of it, then we have a story, but we're no longer living in the story and reacting as if that story was still current. And I think that's what you're talking about, Leigh-Anne, that when we haven't processed the emotions of the trauma that we might have experienced, we're almost looking for little hooks and little opportunities to go back into the story so that we keep telling it to ourselves, trying to understand ourselves and how we became the way we are. But once we've processed all of that, I'm really glad now that I've got a story, because it's those stories that broke me open and caused me to go and explore parts of myself I would never have ventured into otherwise. And I wouldn't wish many of those things on anybody else either, because they caused me great anguish and great grief and great shame and guilt and all of those things. But it helped me to know myself in my depths. And having that story now means I'm a better companion to be with other people who may be stumbling around in the dark of their own story because they've just stumbled into the unprocessed emotions of that or the consequences of that. So in that way, I'm grateful for all of those experiences and wouldn't change any of them at this point. And what a blessing it is to find peace within yourself. And it's often hard won. It means that we need to know ourselves in our depths, process the emotions of whatever traumas we might have experienced, so that we can align ourselves with our first nature rather than what's become second nature to us. Interesting, we call it second nature. You'll hear people often say, oh, it's second nature for me to think, feel, react like this. No one ever questions, well, what's your first nature? What was there before you took on those judgments, those beliefs that you hold about yourself, about others, about life?
What was your first
And in
nature?
many ways, the return journey, which is written about as the prodigal son story in the Christian tradition, is that, we realize happiness is not found out there in our possessions or in our relationships or in our anything material, that happiness is an inside job. And that when we align ourselves with our first nature, which is actually the bridge to that is our neocortex, that higher functioning part of the brain. And when we move out of the default mode, which is the habitual, what's been laid down, the voice in our heads, when we move our consciousness from there to the higher functioning brain, we've got access to wonderful qualities, insight, intuition, wisdom, humor, spontaneity, creativity, compassion. those are the qualities of our essential nature, but it's become second nature to us to see the world through the filter of our judgments and our beliefs. And that's why have been a bit of a fan of suffering, because it's usually suffering that gets us to a place where we're willing to see things differently. But I don't think we have to suffer in order to wake up and realize how amazing and wondrous life actually is, and how when we align ourselves with life, and we can be an instrument of life rather than having to have things my way, that's the beginnings of real happiness in our lives.
An instrument of life. I like that. It's like, okay, so how can I access my instrument of life?
Well, your body is the spacesuit for planet Earth.
Right.
You know, you can't come here and have a human experience unless you pick up one of these. And our consciousness is enmeshed in the physical. So the consciousness we know can be measured many feet out from the body. And it's like that energy is enmeshed into the physical. And according to how we feel, I mean, as very young babies, what's held in that consciousness is not a great deal, although I suspect that we only have one life, but many bodies. So one life of consciousness, and we move in and out of bodies to experience all facets of being human. And this amazing journey of forgetting the power of who we are and then remembering the power of who we are and making that return journey. And, you know, in the Vedic traditions, it's written about the breath of Brahma, you know, the breath out of creation, and then the breath in of reabsorbing creation for the next cycle of creation. And in a way, I think our lives mirror that in a fractal sense of the great breath of Brahma, where creation comes into being and then is withdrawn. Again, it's like every breath is an opportunity of breathing in spirit creation and letting that flow out into creation in some way that is unique to each one of us, as each one of us is an individuated expression of that divine consciousness that enlivens all of creation.
Amazing. You have such a way with describing life, existence. It is that practical wisdom that you have, that you share with your clients, with your community, and you lecture at universities as well.
All kinds of things over the years. You know, in the early years, I mostly worked as a naturopath and yoga and meditation teacher. So when I didn't die of leukemia, you know, I fully expected to. And I had my whole life all packed up in this little suitcase all ready for the big trip. I'd given my children away, all my assets away. I literally only had hand luggage because I couldn't manage a whole suitcase. But then the plane got cancelled and I was faced with, how much do you unpack? How do you live with any certainty in life when you know that life can change? And I'm sure many of our listeners know that life can change in a breath, in a moment, in a conversation, and it's never the same again. And so those moments in our life are often watershed moments where we suddenly, like grief, you know, grief changes your address book. You know, some people will go out of your life. They cannot be with you because they don't know what to say, and you might represent their worst nightmare. I know when my brother took his life and then I was diagnosed, I would often see people scooting out of the corner of my eye, scooting behind a shelf in the supermarket or crossing the street or something, because it was just too hard. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know what to do. And for those who have done that in the past, it's fine just to say, I cannot imagine life how it is for you right now, but I'm here if you want to talk, or I've made a casserole or something. But we only scoot across the street or hide behind a supermarket shelf because of our own awkwardness and our own fears around how would we cope if we had to deal with that grief or that story, whatever it might be. So I think humanity is at a wonderful time where many of the barriers are going to break down. And I think we're kind of polarizing more and more into seeing everything in this very left brain, logical, rational, technological way, or we remember what's the potential of what comes more from the right brain, although it is very integrated. Having said that, our creativity, our imagination, our dreams beyond the current reality. And if we lose that, we lose the capacity for being human. And Greg Braden is writing about this a lot at the moment. I love his work, and literally talking about, we're at this bifurcation point. Are we going to go down this technological pathway where we're very rational? We make decisions according to very logical, perhaps we make a decision that it's not worth spending all that money on premature babies or people after the age of 60. And, we'll get very rational about how we manage humanity, or we remember the divine connection that humanity has to the creative force of the universe, where we can find solutions to any number of issues and challenges that humanity might face. And I think that's a very interesting point. And of course, with AI changing everything as it will over the coming years, we need to be very mindful about having AI under the skin. There are already chip parties where you can go and have a computer chip put into your hand or into your forehead that can have your health details, your passport, your banking details, everything. You can unlock your door. You can do everything through this computer chip. But as Greg Braden has been talking about, as we put more of these chips into our body that will enable us to do things more easily, but it will also diminish the human capacity to do those things naturally. And what we've thought of perhaps as junk DNA for all of this time, and of course it's not junk DNA at all, and indeed there's a good deal being said about it being enlivened right now due to the influx of solar energy that's coming from M-class, X-class flares, because the sun has been very, very active. And as this junk DNA begins to wake up, we're all going to become more psychic and telepathic, and our abilities to heal will become heightened, and we'll feel more connected and less need of words, and we'll be able to communicate more skillfully, more easily with one another. Things will be a lot more transparent. So I think this is an incredibly exciting time for humanity. And I really hope we choose the higher path of remembering our own creative connection to this force in the universe that's about creation. Because we're creative beings. We're made in the image, and we're here to be creative beings and not to get bogged down in the how. That's the universe's job, to figure out the how. Our job is to dream. And when we dream and embody that dream, it is destined to become reality. And I hope that's the future that we all step into collectively as humanity, the dream of what's possible for humanity.
So
to collaborate, to cooperate, to create.
Yes, if we're able to definitely work together to have this amazing, because coming out of the severe element of my illness, I must say that I saw the world as differently, and I saw the beauty in it and the wonder in it and the design and all of those things. And I started the first thing I was able to do were crafty things. The very first thing I was able to do was to knit a square. But it fulfilled most of my needs, which was so important. And I think that we forget that we really are very simple, right?
Yes.
We may do complex things. They may be questionable why they're so complex, but we may do complex things, but we are simple. And the joy in life is in simplicity, not in complexity.
Exactly. And it's in the moment, you know,
Yeah,
it's
in the now.
It's in the eternal present. And, you know, we encourage people throughout all of our programs to come to our senses, because your body is always in the present moment. Your body's never in the future, never in the past, and yet that default mode network part of the brain is forever projecting into the future all the things that might happen, could happen, probably won't happen. Or we go into the past where we regret, we blame, we shame, we rewrite history, we rehash. And while ever we're in the past or in the future, we're not here. And I realized that that was really the peak of selfishness. I realized that I was constantly preoccupied with myself. I was always evaluating myself. Am I enough? What do I have to do to get it right for this person? What do I need to do to get it right for this person? So I was forever trying to figure out the dance steps and evaluating myself constantly. Everything was about me. And I realized I'd become this kind of black hole because everything was about me. And once people think that I had this blinding flash and that's what cured me of leukemia or something. It wasn't anything like that. I did find a degree of peace, but it's all the people that I've spoken to over the last 40 years who've helped heal me, because they've shown me my judgments, my beliefs, and given me opportunity after opportunity to liberate myself from those judgments, liberate myself from those beliefs. And what an incredible gift that has been for me. So I feel very humbled by the fact that the universe loves me so much. It sent me all of these amazing people to help me to heal myself, because when they tell me their story, it's my story. Over and over and over again, the story of believing things about ourselves that are simply not true, living as if they are, and then realizing through our suffering that there's another way to see life, and that we can relinquish all of those judgments and beliefs, indeed relinquish everything that's become second nature to us, so that we reveal and experience our essential nature, which has those qualities of insight, intuition, wisdom, humor, spontaneity, creativity, compassion. That's our natural state. It's become second nature to us to see it differently. But actually, that is our essential nature. And it's often suffering that causes us to make that return journey.
So if we can go back to our original nature, let go of some of those stories, listen to somebody else's, then maybe we can experience life differently with more joy and contribute to greater humanity and see the world change, because it's constantly changing. Well, thank you so much, Petrea, for this amazing time we've had together. I'm sure that our listeners can go and have a look on your website for information about your organisation, and they will, I'm sure, see posts and things around in media about you. So what a gift to sit in conversation with someone who not only walked through the fire, but learned to bless the ashes. Petrea reminds us that healing isn't about returning to who we were. It's about becoming someone deeper, someone wiser, someone more fully alive. even when life doesn't look anything like we expected. When your suddenly different moment came through illness, loss, or quiet unraveling, I hope today's conversation offered a compass back to your center. If something stirred in you, an ache, a truth, a possibility, don't rush past it. Sit with it, breathe with it. Let it become your next gentle step. Thank you for being with us. And thank you, Petrea, for reminding us that peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence we bring to it. Until next time, keep listening inward. You never know who you're becoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Leigh-Anne.
Thank you so much.
This has been Suddenly Different. I'm Leigh-Anne Charland, and I'm so grateful you shared your time with me. If you felt a spark, a tear, or a moment of recognition, I hope you'll pass that gift along by sharing this show. Take a deep breath, trust your path, and I'll meet you back here soon.